And it says it has no worries in a year of drought, right? Because it's been by the stream, it's been soaking that in. So in the year of the drought, AKA when bad things come, no worries because I've been soaking in it so much. I already have such an abundance of fruit, right? Like my tree is already ready to sprout, even though it's a little bit thirsty this year. Hey, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and I am reading through the Bible in 1 year, 365 days. And the reason is because I want us to have a closer relationship with God. I want us to know who He is, why we follow Him, and that really I feel like can best be done. I don't want to say only because not everybody has the Bible, but can best be done through reading your Bible and reading it start to finish, right, cover to cover. Even interestingly enough, going off on a really early tangent, one of my students in class today said that the Bible said this one very certain specific word. And I was like, no, it doesn't. But I wouldn't have known that had I not read through the Bible on multiple occasions. And so I wouldn't have necessarily been able to have this discussion with him because he's coming from a place where he hasn't read the Bible. And so I actually got an opportunity to talk about it a little bit. Anyway, so today is day 223. It is August 10th, and we are still in the book of Jeremiah. So it's Jeremiah 16 through 18 and chapter 35. There's so much in today's reading, so I want to jump right in. Jeremiah is a prophet in the time of Jehoiakim. And so we're going to find out what that looks like. And this is when the nation of Assyria had already taken away Israel, who was the northern kingdom, about 100 years earlier. And then they came in and they have plundered Judah. They have taken some people away from Judah. Babylon has taken some people away from Judah, but it's still sort of intact. So you're going to hear some of the things that he says, and you're like, didn't they already destroy it? They haven't. They are sort of in the process, so to speak, right? So Babylon hasn't come in and completely taken over yet. All right, so Jeremiah, we're starting in Jeremiah 16. So this is what he starts out and says. So God is talking directly to Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a prophet of the Lord, which means he is in relationship with the Lord. And the Lord is talking to him and telling him to do certain things, to say certain things, right, to his people, which are currently the people of Judah. So it says here, the word of the Lord says to me, you must not marry and have sons or daughters in this place. I am not sure yet if Jeremiah has had sons and daughters in another place. But what he's saying is you're not allowed to get married here, and you're not allowed to have sons and daughters here. And it's because I'm going to kill everyone. And I don't want you to have sons and daughters here because I don't want them to die with everybody else. Because sons and daughters are going to be taken out with famine. They're going to be taken out with plague. They're going to be taken out by the sword, right? And so they're all going to die. It says they're going to die of deadly diseases. And so it says they will not be mourned or buried, but they're going to be like dung lying on the ground. So he does not want this for Jeremiah because Jeremiah is speaking the Lord's word to the people, right? And then he says, for this is what the Lord says as well. So the Lord, like we're now just seeing some things that the Lord is saying to Jeremiah that Jeremiah is sharing with the people. Don't enter a house where there's a funeral. Don't mourn and show sympathy because I've withdrawn my blessing and my love. One of the things that the people of Israel always did was funerals were like a big deal, right? There was a big mourning period. There was a cleaning period, right? There was a whole production, right, wrong, and different. There was a whole production over the dead, right? Like, and so for them, he's saying to them now, I don't want you to do any of that, right? Like there's no longer going to be this, I don't want to call it a celebration, but there's no longer going to be a big production, a big funeral procession over the dead because they're not following me. So they don't get that big mourning period, right? Like they don't get you to come and to weep for them and to be devastated and to set them with their ancestors, right? Like there was always this idea too that they would be buried with their ancestors, right? And so there was a connection to all the people of Israel. They don't even get that anymore. So God wants to be very clear that he doesn't want them to celebrate this. He says, I'm going to bring an end to the sounds of joy. Just think about what that means. Think about your own personal, most devastating time in your life. And that is what God is going to do to these people, right? Like the sounds of joy are going to be gone. They're not going to be happy. They're not going to be like, well, there's some good days, there's some bad days, right? Like the sound of joy is leaving them because of what they have done. It says, because they followed the stubbornness of their evil hearts instead of obeying God. Like, here we go with this same line again. And then it says, however, the days are coming when it will no longer be said that, so this is now a new time. Up until this time, and let me tell you what he says. He says, there's going to be a time, he said, now it's no longer going to be said, this is the God that saved you from Egypt. But it's going to be said, this is the God that saved you from the north, right? Because God, excuse me, God plucked all of his people out of Israel, out of Egypt when they were slaves, right? And so there was this great time where, like, for a few hundred years, they were not necessarily without the Lord. They were with the Lord, but they were being held down by the nation of Egypt. And so the Lord came and he saved them, right? And then the Israelites started celebrating the Passover, right? And it was something that they were supposed to remind themselves of all the time. Remember the Passover. Remember that the Lord saved you. Remember how the Red Sea parted. Remember Moses. Remember, right? Like, these were all of the reminders that they were supposed to have. And now he's saying this is going to be a new time. So this was supposed to be, like, it had hit. Noah was a big deal. The Red Sea was a big deal, and the Passover was a big deal. And then this was supposed to be a really big deal, right? Like, they had gotten to the point where it had gotten so high that God was like, now I need to settle this, right? I need to punish the people that are here, right? And then I need to make a way for the new people to come in and worship me. Now, there's still going to be people of Israel, right? There's still going to be the descendants of David and Judah and Jacob, right? Like, all these people, but they're going to come in and they're going to celebrate me. There's going to be a great savior, which we're going to say. He's like, there's going to be a new time. And then you're going to start remembering that, right? So then that is going to be your new memory. So it was this, then it was this, and now it's going to be this, right? They're not going to say this anymore. Now they're going to say this. And here I go again when I'm saying, I don't think that Israel has done this yet. I don't think that Israel has noted that time, right? So what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? And he's like, but in verse 18, I'm going to repay them double for their wickedness and their sin because they've defiled my land, right? So he says now he's going to send for people that are going to destroy them, and he's going to pay them back double. So that time is going to come, but right now is going to be the punishment time, right? And as we move on, and Jeremiah has this prayer, and he says, Lord is my strength and my fortress. And so he always looks to the Lord. And he says, I'm going to teach them. This time I will teach them my power and my might, and they will know that my name is the Lord, right? So Jeremiah is sort of like, Lord, you are my strength. You are, right? Like, you are everything to me. And these people are holding on to idols and false gods. And then God comes and he says, I'm going to teach them and I'm going to show them that my name is the Lord. And then in verse 1 of 17, it says, Judah's sin is engraved with an iron tool. So again, this is all a lot of the same stuff that we say. Visually, I spoke, who knows when, about the difference between tablets and paper, right? Like, people wrote things on paper, scrolls, papyrus, whatever it is you want to call it. But they would also write things on like tablets, right? And so they would engrave them. It would be a little bit different, right? And this would have more longevity than ink on paper. Even now, right? It has more longevity than ink on paper, right? We see statues from hundreds of years ago. If you open a book from hundreds of years ago, there's a really good chance that it's going to fall apart, right? They may make new copies, but your book from 100 years ago might certainly fall apart. So he's saying, this is what your sin is like. Your sin is so deep in you. It is so strong in you that it's like it's engraved in your heart, right? Like, so it's written in a tablet to last there for all eternity, for all to see and for all to know. It says it's written on the tablets of their hearts and on the horns of their altars. Even their children remember all of this stuff. So it is so deeply ingrained in this people group at this time that, like, generations afterwards remember this. In verse 4, it says, through your own fault, you're going to lose the inheritance I gave you. Make no mistake. This is not because God hates you. This is not because God wants to seek vengeance against you. This is not because he chooses who he feels like punishing at the moment, because sometimes he, right? Oh, we use that verse. He has mercy on who he has mercy, and he doesn't. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying here, it is you. You have made these decisions. You have sinned so often that it is now engraved in your heart. You have so much sin in your lives that your children see it and know it and understand it, right? They can see that more than they can see God, right? They see these poles and these other altars where they worship other people, right? And then it says, so I wanted to note this because it says, and these are things that I like to kind of bring up because, again, I want to be clear as to what scripture means, right? And these expressions that we use amongst ourselves, right? And amongst other people, even like, oh, do you believe that the Bible is literal? Well, what does that mean, right? Like all these kind of things. So it says here, I will enslave you to your enemies in a land you do not know, for you have kindled my anger, and it will burn forever. God's anger against the Israelites doesn't literally burn forever because he says, I will bring you back, right? He says, I will love you when you turn to me, right? Those are the things that he's said over and over and over again. And so therefore, if he says those things, where do we place this? My anger will burn forever, right? Like, what do we do with that? And I'm gonna suggest that he's using it as an expression in the way that we would use it when we speak, right? Like, I'm going to kill you. I'm not really going to kill you, right? But it's an expression that I use at that time, which means I'm so angry with you, right? I hate that person. Yeah, I might just be really, really, really angry with them at the moment. And so I think, this is what I think understanding everything else that he says and contextually putting things around it, it's not really going to last forever, but it's going to last a pretty long time, and it means he's pretty angry, right? So I think that's where I want to put it. That's where I kind of see that it makes the most amount of sense, is not that it burns forever, but that it burns for a long time, and it is very upsetting, right? It's an expression that we use. Okay, so then he says, cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. Pretty clear, right? It says, but blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. And then verse 8, it says, they're going to be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. And I so love this visual. This is from someone. So this is what he says, and it was one of the Psalms that I memorized, and I don't remember it all anymore, but I do remember pieces, and this is one because I drew a picture of this tree, and it's right by the stream, and I probably said this when I went over someone, and like the roots, so imagine like that God is the stream, right? The word of the Lord is the stream that comes through, and this tree is planted right there. So it gets all of its sustenance from the word of the Lord, right? And therefore, what it does is it grows really deep, strong roots, and it blossoms and has this amazing fruit, right? Those are the people that hope in the Lord. That's what we get when we hope in the Lord, right? We get strong roots. We can plant them really, really deeply, right? So that when you tug on that, it's not going to go anywhere, right? And then when the rain comes or when we're soaking in that water, that everything blooms and blossoms, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It produces fruit in the season it is supposed to produce fruit. That is what we do when we hope in the Lord, right? And it says it has no worries in a year of drought, right? Because it's been by the stream, it's been soaking that in. So in the year of the drought, AKA when bad things come, no worries, because I've been soaking in it so much. I already have such an abundance of fruit, right? Like my tree is already ready to sprout, even though it's a little bit thirsty this year. So it's already ready to make the fruit when it's supposed to make the fruit. It never fails to bear fruit, this tree. So it says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? So if we go back to that area of those who do not trust in, right? It's because the heart cannot be trusted. We can't go this way and that way, right? So our hearts they're wonky in some ways, right? Like we want what we want, when we want it, how we want it. And somehow, even though I want what I want, how I want it, somehow I get frustrated when somebody else wants what they want, how they want it, when they want it. And then another person wants what they want, right? Because theirs is conflicting with mine, which is conflicting with the other person's. But somehow I believe that mine is completely right and theirs is completely wrong. Meanwhile, while they think they're completely right and I'm completely wrong. Do you see how crazy that is, right? And if we just go by what everybody wants, even if it's a majority, by the way, to be really clear, even if it's like, well, 70% of the country wants that. So it doesn't make it right, right? It just means that 70% of the people's hearts are turned in that direction. That doesn't mean anything. We are so easily manipulated. It does not matter, right? Our brains and our hearts, our wants and our desires. I see enough commercials for Disney World and I desperately want to go. I do not like Disney World. I have been there in the past 5 years and I do not want to go back. And yet every single time a commercial goes on, I go, oh my God, I really want to be there with my kids. We would have so much fun. No, we wouldn't. We didn't have fun last time. Why would we have fun this time? Right? But my heart wants what the TV is telling me looks so good to me. It's such a juicy, lovely, ripe fruit. And that's what I think that I want. Right? My heart sways with the wind. My heart sways with my age. My heart sways with the people I'm around. So we just need to be really careful because it is deceitful. But guess who knows the heart? The Lord knows the heart. So our hope should be in the Lord. He's the one. He knows exactly what we need. He knows exactly what we want. And he knows what we want is usually not good for us. We need to want what he wants because he knows all things. He created all things. That's what he's there for, right? That's what he has done for us. That's why we love him, because of all that he has done. The Lord, search the heart and examine the mind. And the reason I do this is to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. So he checks your heart. Remember how we've learned this? He checks your heart. The heart is deceitful, but he goes in and he checks and he looks at it, right? Because what we're supposed to be changing is not our outward behaviors, right? Our conduct is great, but it comes from in here. This is the thing that makes it clean or dirty, right? So whatever comes in here, it comes outward for us. And then he looks at our heart and then judges us on the outside appearance based on what's on the inside. That's what God does, because God knows all that's in your heart. Then he says in verse 11, like a partridge that hatches eggs it did not lay are those who gain riches by unjust means. So these are the people that we don't want to follow, anyone who is unjust, right? Verse 12, it says, a glorious throne exalted from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. Lord, you are the hope of Israel. So we have two options. The other option is those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord and the spring of living water. So you can either hope in the Lord or you can hope in the world. You have two options. You can choose, right? He never says that you're not allowed to choose. He never makes that choice for you. I don't think that God makes that choice for you. I think he makes it clear in all this that we speak that he doesn't make that choice for you, right? He doesn't force you one way or the other. He gives you your offering and he allows you to take whatever it is that you've decided you believe is the right way, right? So he gives you hope in him or hope in the world. And then Jeremiah says, heal me, Lord, and I will be healed, because he has hope in the Lord, right? He says, let my persecutors be put to shame, but don't put me to shame. So he's crying out for the people that are against him, because we find out the people are all against him. So he's crying out for the people against him to be put to shame, but not him, right? And he says, bring on them the day of disaster, destroy them with double destruction. Then we move on to this next section in Jeremiah where the Lord starts talking about the Sabbath. So he wants to make sure that this Sabbath is holy. He says, go to the gate of the people. So here we are again, where Jeremiah has to go and step out and talk to people who don't want to hear from him. So he says, go to the gate of the people. This is to everybody. This is not the door of the temple, which is where he's been before. This is the gate where it's sort of like the gate of the city where people come in and out. And he says, go to that gate and you're going to shout out to them to honor the Sabbath. That is what I call for. I ask for them to honor the Sabbath. It said, as I commanded your ancestors. Everybody knows that I've wanted you to do this, right? And he says, but if you do not obey me to keep the Sabbath day holy by not carrying any load, because he says you can't even carry anything, by not carrying any load as you come through the gates of Jerusalem, then I'm going to kindle an unquenchable fire in the gates of Jerusalem that will consume her fortress. So that's what he wants them to do. It's another way he wants them to step up. They have the ability to do this. They choose to do it or they don't. Then he moves down to the potter and the clay. He says, this is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go again, another area where he says, go down, go to the potter's house, and I'm going to give you my message. So he goes to the potter's house, and when he goes to the potter's house, he sees what the potter is doing. The potter is creating something, right? And when it doesn't work out for him, he kind of smushes it to make it do something else. Okay, so he says, God looks at them, and if they aren't looking like they're supposed to, right? I have this in my notes because I thought this was really, really important, because I don't think, and I sometimes when I read these things, what I try and come to I try to just read it clean, but sometimes I have a lot of stuff that's already kind of like settled in my head that I've heard for so long, right? Because I've been a Christian like 15 years at this point, and I came from really, really good teaching. So I've heard some of these things, and some of them I'm like, absolutely. And then some of them I'm like, I don't know if that's what it meant. This is kind of one of those things. So this potter and clay thing, God made us for a purpose. And this is one of the things that I feel like I've seen. And he says, and I think even yesterday, maybe I talked about it, the animals actually do their purpose, right? Like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The rocks, they do what they're supposed to be doing. The grass does what it's supposed to be doing. We are the thick-headed ones, right? We're the ones that he made in his image, and we're the ones that keep doing what we're not supposed to be doing, right? And so he looks at this potter, right, making this pot, and the pot that he made wasn't created, and like, so it wasn't going to do what it was supposed to do. So he smushed it and he started all over again. Professional word, smushed it. So he smushed it and started all over again, because what he did is in his second one, he created it again for its purpose, right? So it's not like God's going, I can do whatever I want with you. I can smush you. I can whatever, right? Because I'm the God of the universe, and whatever I want goes. Which, I mean, there's definitely some truth to that. But it's because we aren't fulfilling our purpose, right? The Israelites were not fulfilling their purpose. What was their purpose? Their purpose was to follow the Lord and to let others know who the Lord of the universe was, right? They were his chosen ambassadors for the rest of the world. And they were not fulfilling that purpose. They were turning to all kinds of other gods. And so he said, okay, that shmush, rebuild, right? And so that's what he's going to do to them. He's going to smush, and he's going and he's going to rebuild. It's sort of like the 40 years in the wilderness, right? Remember the 40 years in the wilderness, if you were with me. He was like, okay, you guys, I told you I was going to give you this land. Remember, I told you this was yours. And then you went there and you were like, whoa, those people are so scary. No, but I told you I was going to give you this land. You didn't fulfill your purpose. I told you. So you know what? Shmush. I'm going to rebuild that pot. Okay, so those 40 people or those 40 years, that generation needed to die out, and the new pots were built up. They were taught in the way of the Lord. They were circumcised, and then they were brought into the kingdom to fulfill their purpose. They were brought into Israel to fulfill their purpose through Joshua. This is what he's saying, right? He's not saying, I just want to destroy you because I have the power to do so. You're not fulfilling your purpose. Guys, are you fulfilling your purpose? Like, am I fulfilling my purpose? Am I doing what I am created to do, which is worship the Lord in all things? In my marriage, in my parenthood, in my job, in my home, in my family, right? Like, am I fulfilling my purpose? When I make dinner, am I fulfilling the purpose of the Lord? Am I doing it unto the Lord? That's my purpose. Are other people seeing me do that? Are my deeds such that he knows that my heart is turned towards him and not turned towards somebody else, right? Is my hope in him, or is it in the world? And I want my hope to be in him. So he says, therefore, this is what the Lord says. A horrible thing has been done by Israel. Judah's not doing what it was created to do, right? And so it says, and he relates it. He says, does the snow in Lebanon ever vanish from its rocky slopes? Does its cool waters from distant sources ever stop flowing? Lebanon was doing its purpose, right? Do we see it drying up? Do we see the snow? Do we see it's warm and toasty up there like a tropical island? No, we don't, right? So are you like Lebanon, or are you like something else? So he's like, I'm going to scatter them before their enemies. Then it's these people are going to plot against Jeremiah because they're tired of hearing this. They're done. And they're like, we're going to kill this guy. Although I think it's funny because it says, so come, let's attack him with our tongues and pay no attention to anything he says. But then he says they're going to kill me. So like, he obviously either thinks there's something different or knows that there's something different when they say we're going to attack him. So he has this prayer to destroy all of Jeremiah. He asks God to destroy all of his enemies. And then we're going to finish up in chapter 35, talking about the Rechabites. And this is another story I found super fascinating. So this is the word that came to Jeremiah during the reign of Jehoiakim. Go to the Rechabite family and invite them to come to one side of the room of the house of the Lord and give them wine to drink. So then he does this, right? He does this. And then when they show up, they're like, oh, no, we don't drink wine. So Jeremiah, the prophet of the Lord, offers them wine, and they say, no, we don't drink wine. Why don't they drink wine? This is what's the key. So I don't know if you guys remember this story, but the Rechabites, let me see, because I have it in here. So the Rechabites were in 2 Kings 10. Okay, so the Rechabites were Jehonadab. Jehonadab was the one who was, he says, neither you nor your descendants must ever drink wine, right? He says, and you must never build houses or sow seeds or plant vineyards. So this is from 2 Kings 10 when he came and he helped out. And so then they said, so now he's kind of like, his family is going to be, all his generations after that are going to be more tribal. They're not going to be like, they're going to live in tent communities. They're not going to live amongst the rest of the tribes. And so that's what they did. So then, so through these generations, this family, the Rechabites, honored the word of the father of the descendant of these people, the ancestor of these people. And so God's like, if these people can follow that, because what happened was they even wound up living in tents. And when Assyria came to destroy Israel, the northern kingdom, they actually moved with their tents down to the southern kingdom because they were like, oh, we're only in tents, right? So like, was that why it was prophesied that they shouldn't drink wine and they should only live in tents? Maybe, right? So they were safe and protected, and they were able to move down into the southern kingdom. Maybe that was why. So he's like, if they're going to do that, you guys can't even listen to me. And they lived in tents and drank wine based on their ancestor, what their ancestor told them. And so he's frustrated, of course, as he should be, because they did not follow that. He says, then Jeremiah says to the family, all the way down in 18, he says, Jeremiah says to the family, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, said. You have obeyed the command of your forefather, Jehonadab, and have followed all instructions, have done everything he ordered. Therefore, Jehonadab, son of Rechab, will never fail to have a descendant to serve me. So that's how we finish today. It's actually a really good note because they did what they were supposed to do. If we go back to a chapter before that, they did their purpose. That was what they were supposed to do. And because they fulfilled their purpose, they weren't smushed. They were rewarded for it. The Lord rewarded them for fulfilling their purpose. I feel like that's a good ending today, right? Like we ended on a high note. For Jeremiah, that's pretty good because he's pretty weepy. So if this has been a blessing to you guys, I want you to like, share, subscribe to the channel. And as always, I want you to keep reading. I'll see you next time.